Good afternoon. My name is Barbara England, and it is my honor to welcome you today to this conversation, Working It Out, between Bea Nettles, the artist, and the curator, Mary Statzer. I'm a member of the McKinley Arts Council here in Champaign, Illinois. That's where the Artist Alley Fine Gallery is located. Artist Alley was established in 2017, and it sits in the space between the McKinley Foundation at the University of Illinois and Presby Hall, which is housing for about 250 students. Some of our focus has been on social justice issues, such as the Interactive for Freedoms project and an environmental photography show. It's always our pleasure to showcase the work of outstanding artists, but we are also particularly pleased when we can have this professional space for the work of students to participate in either individual or group shows. And we host an annual show of the artwork of McKinley Presbyterian Church, a close partner to the foundation, both geographically and in programming. If you are interested in supporting Artist Alley financially, we thank you for your generosity. Like all of you, we are eager to return to in-person gatherings, but we are thrilled today to offer this virtual event to you. I have seen Harvest of Memory, Bea's retrospective at the Cranard Art Museum, and it is spectacular. So we'll get things started now, and I will introduce you to Paula Hancock, who is the director of the McKinley Foundation at the University of Illinois.
Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to introduce my friend Mary Statzer, and it's strange to introduce her so formally, but here we go. Mary Statzer is Curator of Prints and Photographs at University of New Mexico Art Museum. She organizes exhibitions in all mediums of art and is dedicated to serving the community through object-based learning. Her goal is to feature artistic practices that challenge, delight, inspire, and inform viewers. Mary has published articles in Aperture magazine and edited a multi-author book titled The Photographic Object 1970. And if you're interested, there's a short interview with Bea in that book. She brought Jess T. Dugan's exhibition To Survive on This Shore, photographs and interviews with transgender and gender nonconforming adults to UNM Art Museum and organized the exhibitions Patrick Nagatani, A Survey of Early Photographs, which was a great show I got to see. Please Enjoy and Return, Bruce Conner Films from the 60s, and Indelible Ink, Native Women, Printmaking and Collaboration. She is currently working on an online platform for the museum with the ceramic sculptor and writer Rose B. Simpson, who hails from Santa Clara Pueblo in New Mexico. Many of you may know this, but Mary has proud ties to Central Illinois. She grew up in Tuscola, that's where we met, just 30 miles south of Champaign-Urbana, and earned her BFA in printmaking and drawing from Illinois State University. She holds an MFA from Arizona State University and a PhD in art history from University of Arizona, where she specialized in the history of photography and museum studies. And we are really happy to welcome Mary here to lead us through this conversation with Bea. So with that, I'm going to remove my spotlight and highlight Mary.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? See me? Good. Okay. Thank you, McKinley. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Barbara, for that warm introduction. I'm coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. It's great to see friends from all over, from my past and my present, and I'm thrilled to be here with Bea, who I've known about 10 years when I interviewed her for my book. So Bea, welcome. And congratulations on the book and exhibition, Bea Nettles, Harvest of Memory. I also want to congratulate Jamie Allen at the George Eastman Museum, who spearheaded this project. Olivia Las Gonzalez and Amy Powell at the Cranard Art Center, who all wrote for the beautiful, beautiful catalog. And Amy, thank you for your assistance today with images and making me feel welcome here on the virtual campus of University of Illinois. If I'm correct, the exhibition is up through March 6th, isn't that right? Bea, can you give me a thumbs up? And yeah, so I hope you all have a chance to see it. There's still a little time, and the museum's open, right? No,
It is.
fantastic, yeah. So at this point, Bea, why don't you just give a hello before I switch to the PowerPoint?
Okay, I just want to say hi to everybody that's out there. When I was a little kid, we watched a TV show where they'd go around the audience with a microphone and kids would get real nervous and they'd say, I'd like to say hi to my grandma, my mom, and my dad, and everybody that's watching. And that's what I'm trying to say to you. I appreciate you taking time out of your day.
Great. Well, I've got some bio material I want to cover with Bea first. I'm going to share my screen now. You can see some pretty pictures. Great. Can everybody see that?
Yep. It looks good.
Okay.
At least
Great.
I see it.
Great. So, by way of introduction, for those of you who are not familiar with Bea's work, Bea entered the field of art and photography and academia at a time when women were woefully underrepresented. For example, Bea, you were the only woman represented by Light Gallery. Let's see if I can change the slide here. The first contemporary photography gallery in New York City when it opened in the early 70s. This is the exhibition poster for your exhibition at the George Eastman House, as it was called in the early 70s, which I love, this image of you as a star lady. And you were hired as a faculty member at RIT. And what year was that, Bea?
I first actually started teaching at Nazareth College in 1970, which was in Rochester. And this show actually was responsible for me getting the next job. The people from RIT came over and saw the show, and they had an opening. I think it was a full-time opening, and they asked me to interview. And so I moved there in 71 and taught there for several years. Went away for a while, then came back. So I have a long history with Rochester Institute of Technology.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
That's,
Well, my understanding is that there were 2 women on the faculty to 58 men. Is
48.
that right?
It was pretty bad. Yeah, there were. It was actually well, Betty Hahn, who's out there in New Mexico, was there. But the year that they took this picture that's in the catalog, she was on sabbatical, I believe, and there was just the 2 of us, myself and a woman who went on to be the head of the Kansas City Art Institute. So 2 women, 48 men. Yeah, it was something.
Wow. Well, actually, I love that you brought up Betty. Betty Hahn is former faculty member here at University of New Mexico. And I think it was Betty that told me that they they didn't necessarily bother getting to know which woman was which.
Right. We were Beatrice Hahn or Bea Nettles. It was interesting. They all look the same, you know.
Those were some tough times to be a woman in the field. So
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty stark illustration of that point.
Yeah.
So over the course of your career, Bea, you taught at more than 25 colleges, universities, and art centers, often returning to them again and again.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, could you just list off a few of those places, and maybe especially the ones that you loved returning to?
Well, the main jobs that I had, it sounds like I went to a lot of colleges, but were at Rochester Institute of Technology, and also for a few years at Tyler School of Art, and then here at the University of Illinois. Those are the college jobs. 1 year at Nazareth College. But I also taught quite a lot at a place called Penland School in North Carolina, where I started first as a student in 1967.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a college student, junior. And the next year I was there and I took a class, and the next teacher didn't show up. So they offered it to me. And I was just out of undergrad school. So it was wonderful. It was a terrific opportunity. And they liked what I did, and they invited me back again and again in the 60s and 70s. And then I had children and it got complicated. But I've gone back many times, and I've also gone several times as a student, which is wonderful. And I think that was one thing that was so impressive about Penland was the age span. You could start taking classes when you were 19, but there was no limit as to how old you might be. And that impressed me a lot as a young person when I saw, 70-year-old people, 80-year-old people still doing art. That was an indelible impression.
I love that. I love that. I love thinking about sort of, and I had my own moment when I was a young artist where I realized that art was a career you could be in till you were, quite old. And
you just don't retire. You're always, you always are an artist. And there's some quote to that effect that you can't retire because that's what you are.
Yeah. So right now I'm showing your two books that are quite well known, Breaking the Rules, a Photo Media Cookbook, and Cooking the Books, Concise Guide to Bookbinding, because I want to highlight your teaching you established a BFA program in photography at University of Illinois, which is also your alma mater.
Mm-hmm.
And you were the chair of the photography department there for 15 years and honored by being named Professor Emerita upon your retirement in 2008. I just was hoping you could talk a little bit about these books, what years they were published, and how they sort of got your name out there as someone who was a go-to person for technique.
Okay, I don't think I'll be able to tell you the exact dates, but Breaking the Rules came out in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. And that's me with my Instamatic camera and flash at the Last Supper, really upsetting everybody.
Breaking the rules. That's right there.
First of all, you're not supposed to use a flash, and there I am in my sundress. That book was put together with my teaching notes for alternative photographic processes, things like cyanotype, Van Dyke Brown, those kinds of processes, some of which you can still do today, but some have become obsolete, replaced by other techniques. And this was a result of already several years of traveling and teaching workshops and handing out handouts. I go back to mimeograph machines. That's how far back I go. But eventually we had Xerox machines, and you'd make these copies and you'd hand them out. But it seemed much more practical to have a book. And also I found that other people were taking my notes and copying them and almost like calling them their own. And I thought, I have a special knack of explaining things well. So I would like to get some credit for that. So it was actually my husband that urged me to write this book. So I did, and I self-published it. And it's the book that sold the most of mine. You don't make a lot of money selling photo books. They're expensive to produce, but then you have to distribute them to more than just your friends and family. But textbooks are usually pretty lucrative. So that book helped to finance other kinds of projects that I did, other publishing projects. And if people see the show, they'll see that I've published a lot of books. We don't focus on the offset books, which are technically, I guess, called photo books these days, but I did things that were also like early zines and that sort of thing. So I've always been involved with book publishing and a production, okay? So that brings me to the Cooking the Books, which is not offset, it's print on demand. which is just wonderful. If you get an idea, you can go out to Lulu or one of those sites, put a book together, get one copy. And sometimes that's all you want. But normally, you know, you want to make more than that. But they will, some of these sites will sell them for you, or you can order them yourself and sell them if you can. But it's much easier to publish these days than it ever was.
Yeah, yeah. And so moving on a little bit, I just want to talk about your professional achievements and how even more remarkable they are given the nature of your work. Your work countered stereotypical and sexist depictions of women in photography that were prevalent at the time. I have an ongoing joke with the staff, the collection staff at my museum, whenever they pull out a box of nudes from the 70s, you can always tell.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, almost always male photographers. And so over the course of your career though, Bea, you depicted women as whole beings. You addressed themes of female identity, motherhood, childhood, women's health, the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, breast cancer, menopause, you know, those very significant themes. And these subjects were taboo and still remain difficult to talk about in many respects. Yeah. Like I'm thinking how shocking that nude of the very pregnant Demi Moore on the cover of Vanity Fair was, and that was in 1991.
Yeah, this is 79, so it does go back.
Right. So, you know, you were doing that 12 years before Demi Moore hit the mainstream with her pregnant belly. So I want to point that out, that you were remarkably successful, even with very difficult work. And while all this was going on, you and your husband, Lionel Suntop, raised two wonderful children, Rachel and Gavin. And you made your life as a sister, a daughter, a wife, a mother, part of both your working process and the imagery yourself. And here's another example. This is Lionel with Rachel, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just wondered, is there anything you'd like to say about that, or are there stories about these two photographs I've just shown you that you might want to highlight today?
Probably not these two in particular. There are no big stories behind them. But this was when I had one child. I don't think we're going to see any of the ones that I made after Gavin was born. I had to change my working method, and I know we're going to talk about constraints in this conversation, but there were many constraints that I faced as an artist, economic being one of them, lack of materials or the scarcity of materials. Looking at this image, this is probably a good example. If you wanted an image to look like this in 1979, there wasn't Photoshop.
Right.
Okay. There was black and white or color, and even color in the 70s was toxic and dangerous, and not many people printed in color. So coming from an art background, and I wanted my images to look like this, I had to invent, in a way to do that. And there's a very good YouTube video that I did called Flamingo in the Dark, and it goes into the technical aspects of how an image like this would have been made. But people today, those young people, you know, they cannot imagine a world without Photoshop.
Right.
You just can't. So to create an image along these lines was quite something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to say, you know, your work also challenged divisions between mediums of art.
That's right.
Something I wrote about.
Yeah, this was tricky because when I make an image like this, photographers didn't accept it as photography, and printmakers didn't accept it as printmaking, or painters. You know, it just wasn't. It wasn't something that was recognized as a technique or as a way of working. So I always do that sort of thing.
You got a special knack for that, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, you also embraced elements of women's craft like sewing and needlework. And, when neither, women nor craft were taken very seriously.
True.
So, these were not well-respected strategies, you might say.
No, they were practical though. I don't know if we're going to get to an image of a stitched thing, but I can tell you how that came about. Maybe not yet.
We are going to get to that.
Okay.
I'm determined. So I'm going to move it along.
Okay.
Just for everybody's benefit, now we've kind of covered some of Bea's bio points. I'm going to, or points on her biography, rather. We're going to do some kind of thematic looking at images and talking. So I'm going to start with self-portraits and complex representations of women and motherhood. And so here are two self-portraits of Bea from 69 and 70. And, Bea, your contributions to photography are many, but I think chief among them is your lifelong commitment to representing women in all of their complexity. And you often used self-portraits to describe what it is like to inhabit a female body, and not only that, but to inhabit one over time. When and what made you decide to take on female body as a subject, and why did you use your own body as the subject of many of your pieces?
Well, I'm available for one thing. I mean, that's just a practical reason. I could take self-portraits with a self-timer, and I was always interested in doing that. So that's one of the main reasons. Also, portraiture, especially self-portraiture, was one of the things that attracted me to photography in the first place. No matter how well you could draw, and I couldn't draw that well, it wasn't as believable as a photograph of yourself. So the believability in terms of the way I looked as a young person, but also as I'm aging and all of that, you see that in later work, was what attracted me to photography in the first place.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm just scanning.
Here's a good example of that. The pictures of me from 10 years old through 50, and this little book is really quite magical. It's quite small, actually. It's about this big, where the eyes are cut out of the pages, and as you turn back and forth through it, you see me at every decade, and it's a little creepy at the end where you see back to these 10-year-old eyes kind of still staring out of a 50-year-old face, and vice versa. But you have all those people in you all the time.
Right.
I still have the 10-year-old when I ride my bike. Basically, when I'm on my bike, I feel like I'm 10.
I love that idea. I would love this project.
Yeah, I do too. It's one of my favorite books.
I think it's really a very smart and concise way to describe that transformation, physically.
The transformation, also the containment of all those beings. You've always got them. They're always with you.
Yeah, I love that. Tell me, a little bit about what it took to, physically and emotionally to photograph yourself during challenging times, like that picture I showed when you were 7 months pregnant, or when you lost your hair from chemotherapy, something like that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know if do we have an image of hair loss in here? I forget.
We do. Let's see.
Okay, if it comes along, there we go. Perfect. I did survive breast cancer, and during that year, basically, I didn't have a lot of energy. I still taught. I taught full time, which was probably a good thing. But I lost all my hair, and so the one thing I could do was leave a 4x5 camera set up with Polaroid film, and once a month I documented the loss of the hair, and then as the hair grew back, and that was about it. Creatively, about all I felt I could handle. But you can't see too well in this image, but you'll see it in the book. There's handmade paper used for the end sheets of this book that contains the hair that fell out. I gave the hair to my daughter, who's a textile artist, and she knew how to make paper. And I said, make me some paper that contains the hair, because I know I'll do something with it. And in a way that empowered her a little bit with her mother's situation, to be able to do something for me. And then I was actually in Nebraska when this happened. As soon as I got home, I had my son give me a buzz because I had just little pieces of hair. And it's described very briefly in the book, the traumatic feeling of, I didn't think it'd be a big deal, but it was to go bald that quick.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now we're in the section I'm calling working process and construction or constructive use of limitations. And I put this as an example of, just what you said, of when you were doing chemo and you were not feeling well and you didn't have a lot of energy, but yet it was important to still keep making the work, and you found a way to do that, and it turned into this beautiful book. I also want to point out,
I didn't finish this book for quite a few years, actually. I couldn't deal with it. But I knew I had done the work. So when I was ready to do it and the idea came to me, then I was ready. I had the images made.
Yeah. And, also we're going to talk about collaborating with your children, and I didn't think of it, but this is already an example of that.
That's right.
Another example is the way you use repetition in your work, using the same negative more than one time in the same piece. Very often that's a strategy you use to make the piece larger, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Or rhythmic in a sense.
Right. You're also known to use the exact same photographic negative many times.
I got caught on that, I tell you. The curators were very sharp. They would say, you used that 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, yeah, right.
You feel a little busted?
Yeah.
I just think it's smart,
Well, this particular contact sheet, this one roll of film, I used a lot. You saw the announcement was from here, right? Well, I'm pointing and no one can see what I'm pointing. That image, this image, they were all shot, made from these 12 shots. And film used to mean something also. When you had 12 shots to a roll, you tried to make the best of it, although you can see in the bottom corner, the self-timer must have gone off unexpectedly, and that's what happened there. And, a couple of those are flops, but by and large, I used most of the negatives. And this was also the beginning image of my tarot deck, which we're not going to take time to talk about today, but that's something I'm really well known for, was doing the first photographic tarot card deck. And the Queen of Stars was shot on the 4th of July, 1970. So it's about 50 years old at this point.
Just out of curiosity, do you remember the location of this shoot?
Oh, sure. This was Penland. This all started at Penland. And anyone who's been to Penland is going to recognize those concrete blocks because they were hand cast. They were very peculiar, sort of ridgy cast concrete blocks. And it's the front porch of a structure that's the gallery today at Penland.
Yeah, we have already established the fact that you're expert enough in bookmaking that you wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to just point out that we have your earliest, or one of your earliest books here, because you didn't know how to bind books in 1970. So you used office supplies in order to make a book.
That's right. We all did this in high school. We had notebooks, so I figured that's one way I can contain all these collages that I'm making.
Yeah. So I've been very interested lately in the seemingly simple idea that art can help, that it can help you, the maker, as well as the viewer, in both large and small ways. I'd like to talk now in this section about that.
Okay.
And here's the Kool-Aid heart. So we can talk about sewing.
Okay.
I would love for you to talk to us about how making your work has helped you.
Sure.
And maybe you can also just sort of help us understand what we're looking at here in terms of the materials.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about the sewing right off the bat in terms of a strategy for putting images together. Everyone goes on about how it's a feminist statement and so forth. For me, it perhaps, but also it was a practical solution for me. I was a grad student when I started sewing photos on boards. One of the first things I did was paintings, and there's one in the show called The Skirted Garden, and there's also an etching that was printed on muslin and stitched together. And then I thought, you know, I could stitch paper too. I could stitch, it doesn't have to be cloth, it could be paper, and I could stitch photos. And so I started to stitch photos, which of course horrified a lot of photographers that I would be doing that. But I had seen my grandmother sew together little books on a sewing machine. I mean, just one or two little things, but I knew it could be done. So sewing, for me, was also a very practical way of getting an image on another surface, on a mat board or whatever, or making a composite. And this was because I was denied access to a dry mount press. And that's, again, an old technique that probably isn't used that much, mounting with a dry mount press. But in order to use a dry mount press as a grad student, I would have had to take an entire semester of photography to get access to that piece of equipment. So forget it, you know. If I could do this, and I could do this in the grad studio, and I was satisfied with the way I was putting the images together. So that's sort of how that came about. It wasn't like, oh, I'm a feminist, I'm going to sew, although I knew how to sew. My grandmother had shown me some crazy things. She was sort of pretty creative, that's putting it mildly. But it also was a practical consideration for me. Okay, this image in terms of helping and working it out was done after the breakup of a relationship. And so there's the heart came into my work right around that time, 1971, when this happened. And this one, of course, has been broken and has, you know, shattered. And so that was a reflection of what was actually going on in my life at that point. This whole book is in the Eastman Museum owns this book, and it's in the show in its entirety. And this is one of those loose leaf notebooks, but the advantage of binding it that way is that you could take the pages out and show them, which I have done in various exhibitions. And this is the story of Neptune and Lake Lady. Neptune, in this case, being the god of a swampy lake down in Florida, and Lake Lady being me. And our relationship, when I am more or less seduced, I go under the water and sort of mess around with Neptune. But in the end of the book, you're going to see that I float up and go out across the surface of the water. My legs are just sort of gliding, and I've left the water. Now, I made this book over a period of months. Again, it was a practical solution. I could work on a collage when I had a little bit of time, and it was just a really good way for me to work. I was a young professor in Rochester at this point. And anyway, the book predicted the breakup of the relationship with Neptune. And I didn't even know that was going to happen, but it was in the work. Same thing here. This particular body of work is called Escape. And the image of the window was the apartment window of my place in Philadelphia when I was teaching at Tyler. That's one of my art pieces of birds in a plastic sky, but they're trapped in what looks like a barred sort of prison. And then the image of me is my escapism into my mind, like closing my eyes in front of that same image. And as I was making these images, I realized I was dealing with escapism, prison, escape, and so forth, because I was living in a very dangerous neighborhood in Philadelphia. And if you follow the sequence, which was in the book called The Woman's Eye some years ago, you'll see at the end, I moved to suburbia. I moved to a small house outside of the urban situation that I was in. So it's also autobiographical, but it helped me through this period where I was very uneasy.
Mhm, mhm. How about this one?
This also deals with the onset, the dread of breast cancer. I had had several biopsies and the needle biopsies, and there's a pincushion to prove it. Needle biopsies, you can see a scar on my breast there. I had surgical biopsies. It was an ongoing thing. They were watching me very carefully for several years. And then the lumps that I had turned to cancer, and they caught it early enough that I survived, and I've done fine. But that's what this triptych is about. It's called Pincushion. And it was precancerous, this image. I mean, it was my thinking about the dread of all of that.
Did you have a sense that somebody else who was dealing with breast cancer, biopsies, or, working through the anxiety of waiting for their own diagnosis, that kind of thing, did you ever imagine that this piece would be helpful to them, or was it really
No,
more about?
not that specifically.
Yeah.
But I have always felt that by being honest in my work and taking risks and being somewhat bold, I would encourage other people to do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the hope, because we've all got stuff. Everybody's got a story. Everybody has something they're dealing with.
Yeah.
You think people's lives are perfect. I used to tell my kids that, it looks like everything's perfect, but it's not. Not that everything's negative. I mean, you've got some good things too, definitely. But I think sharing and being honest is very important. It certainly is in my work.
Yeah. And also, in the wonderful essays in your new book, the monograph for this exhibition, they talk about how you worked with your children, that you made work with your children, and often in times when they were working through their own anxieties, or you were working through your anxieties about being a mother. And I just, I love that you included your children in your process, that you knew what it could do for you to make the work. And that's something you passed on to your children. And I think that's really lovely.
Yeah, this is a nice triptych. It is not a triptych, but it's 3 images, 3 portraits of us at that same time. And I particularly like the one of feminine, masculine, especially with all the renewed interest in the fact that if the world is not set up just with duality, but that's what this was about: feminine, masculine. You're a princess or you're a prince. You're king or a queen or whatever. And Rachel had been given these words to sort, and she did okay for a while, and then it got kind of messed up. It was like, what's a heroine? What's son-in-law? What the heck? Just arrange them any old way. So it brings home that point that kids learn this. They're taught that you're this or you're that. And this was about duality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this piece of Gavin with the world.
Yeah.
And maybe it's taking a little curatorial license here, but I think of it as, Gavin, sort of holding the world on his shoulders.
You're absolutely right. It's the weight of the world. That's what I thought when I made it. It was this child with these beautiful eyes looking up at me, the parent, the next, responsible person, with the weight of the entire world on his little camouflage chest.
Yeah.
Yeah, very poignant to me, really powerful.
Big sad eyes, like he might be looking up at you.
He is.
Guidance.
Yeah, he's like, Mom, yeah.
Help me out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is another case in point. As hard as you try, to be gender neutral and so forth, it's difficult. So Rachel got all my, let's see, what was this? All the Kleenex in the house and all the Scotch tape and diapered all these dolls. And frankly, I never bought a Barbie doll in my life, but they appeared in the house. Gifts, somehow she had several. And there's not much parents can do. And I mentioned that. This is from the book Life's Lessons. I mentioned that a lot of this is beyond our control as parents, no matter how hard you try.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So briefly, and we are sort of, I don't want to go too much longer because I want to leave enough time.
Yeah, we got to move along. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's talk a little bit about collaboration.
Okay.
And your family members as creative partners. We've already, that was an example, right? Those are Rachel's dolls.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start and just with this group of images of the imaginary blowtorch from 1973. They're images by you, including some images from your family cache of snapshots.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, that's your mother with you and your brothers.
That's right.
Right, and these are poems by your mother, Grace Nettles.
Right.
So you were her you were her publisher.
That's right. She never had an interest in being published, but she was an incredible teacher and mentor to me. And she didn't even start teaching college till she was 50. She went back and got a degree and had a 20-year teaching career from 50 to 71 or something. And I should mention also that's my dad's photos, so of us. So he also, I steal from everybody, but he loved photography, and I got a lot of my interest in it from him when he would bring a camera home, which was also very special to have a photo session. But he made it look real hard, so I never thought I would be very good at it. At any rate, these are early books from the 70s, and they were really hard won. They would be taken, offset pages were printed and then folded, and then I screen printed Mylar so that I could have these interesting overlays, and that's what you see in the top two images of that palm tree. It's actually on Mylar, so when you turn it over, that's what's happening. I think we actually have them reversed, but at any rate, that's okay. The palm tree would block the poem, and then you'd peel it back, and then you'd see the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this. I'm going to stick with the collaborating with your children
sure.
thing because I think it's so distinctive about your work.
Yeah.
Why was it important for you to collaborate with them rather than simply making them the subject of your work? I mean, there's plenty of examples of the latter, right? Like Sally Mann, of course.
Yeah. Well, they were so creative. My kids were very creative, and so I stole like crazy. I honestly don't remember who made the popsicle stick kids, but Hansel and Gretel, and then there's a drawing that was done probably at Montessori school of claws, and I thought, how creepy, this like the aspect of the bird being claws. So this is the story of Hansel and Gretel. And if you look really closely at the house, that was Rachel's drawing of the house with the stairwell going outside the house because she couldn't represent the second floor any other way. If you look real closely, you'll see it in the negative space coming down from the top corner, a woman's face in profile. And that was one of those happy accidents. But when I stood back and realized that's what it was, I was really thrilled. So it's like it's the mother or the stepmother or some kind of ghost figure in that scene, which would be me in relationship to Hansel and Gretel.
I can only imagine. I mean, this is like refrigerator art, display elevated. Like I can only imagine how empowered your children felt by being part of your work.
I hope so. I think they did. And actually in this body of work, Rachel's Holidays, And there is a picture in the show of me that Rachel took, because in order to get them to be patient and model for me and cooperate, sometimes I had to turn the table and let them take a picture of me. And that's what that is in the show. There's a picture of me with all kinds of props that Rachel put around me. And Gavin also took a dynamite image that's not in the show, but he took one of me that fired a little bit too soon. And I pulled it, it was a Polaroid. I pulled it apart and I showed it to him and I said, Gavin, I kind of look like a witch. And he looked up at me with those little eyes. He says, yeah. I realized that was a good one because it meant that there's days when the parent, looks pretty overbearing.
Yeah, and I
He
remember.
captured it.
Yeah. If the shoe fits, Mom.
Yeah, you do, Mom.
Just a couple more here. I'm gonna move us along though, and just I would like to ask you one question about legacy and retrospective exhibitions. And you've been working very hard to get your work into archives and museums, and I'd love for you to talk. Just tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges are for older artists.
Oh, yeah.
Who are trying to place their work in museums and archives and, land a retrospective show like this. As you're talking, I'm going to flip through a few of the images of the installation at Cranor.
Yeah. This is the Cranor layout of it.
It's so beautiful, by the way.
We were going to talk about constraints, and one constraint certainly is living in the Midwest. It's a little hard to be, especially in a small town, to be taken as seriously as one might if you were in a larger city, I think. There's advantages to it too. It's a great place to be, certainly in this time of COVID and all of that, but that's been a challenge, the geographical location.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already talked about what it's like to be female.
Yeah.
It's hard too. And also it's hard to categorize this work.
Yeah.
Like,
and this is a good example. I mean, the Skirted Garden is right here. It's a painting that's also a sculpture. And does it have any photographic elements?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And books too, they're not big ticket items, but they're very important in my work, and I would not do them. This isn't about making money, but the advantage of books is that they do get out and people do see them. And I mentioned, I've often mentioned that people come up to me and they say, I love your work. I've always loved your work. And I ask them, where do you see my work? Yeah. And they realize, to their shock, they've never seen my work. They've seen books. They've seen reproductions of my work. So I really encourage any of you that are close by to get in and see the show, because it's very different in reality. The surface qualities, the scale, the whole bit. Yeah. It's a real rare opportunity.
Yeah, please. I myself am not able to do that.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
I'm so disappointed because I thought I was going to be in the Midwest this fall and would have been able to see it. But
it's been a very frustrating experience in that regard. Yeah,
no doubt. Well, the George Eastman Museum does have a wonderful virtual walkthrough of the exhibition on their website, so I want to let people know that. Would you like to close with?
I would. We'll just move through a few of these. We don't have a lot of time, but I think we have time for me to do one reading. These are books of mine, the most recent, like the last 7 years or so. I photographed, stop at this one, in graveyards and find people's last names. If you go back one, Mary, that'd be good, if you can. Okay, so this is the book World's Mother Way, and there's another book called Place. These are books that I made using people's last names that I photographed in graveyards that are nouns and verbs and adjectives. And Nettles is a verb, it's also a noun. Okay, so now we can move ahead. One, World's Mother Way is the story of three women who all were mothers, and we'll start with Eve, just a little bit from Eve, written in people's last names. So this is the biblical creation story, although if you read the whole thing at the end, there's a bit of a twist, and I give Eve a lot more power than she's normally given in the biblical story. But this is Eve, her long story, and I'll just read a teeny bit. But Causemaker brings forward full ferns, crafts hardy olive trees. This is the creation story. Okay, go to the next one. Okay, the next story is Judy, who had a child. She was married to Punch, that awful puppet, and they have a terrible battle, the two of them. But this is the first scene in the Punch and Judy story, where there's a little tent that's set up for the puppet show on the beach. And the eager rabble gathers over by North Sea shores. Red-white tinting frames gaudy show booth. Young boys swarm below stage, standing on beach. Loud cheers. Hopes mount, nearing folly. Presto, bowing, Mr. Punch enters. Noseworthy jester smiles cleverly. Bright red hook noser fella. Crummy ruff below cherry chin point. Tassel curls down from cap's peak. Motley garbs stretch over hefty sides. Jolly good showman, mood running high. Hornpipers play lively tune. So that sets the scene. Okay. Yeah. And then the last one in the series is Hester of the Scarlet Letter. So all three of these women are mothers. They were all given a certain degree of guilt. And there's that in this book. It's very feminist, but there's also the aspect that we name mostly after the father. So we have this patriarchal naming system, which I'm also trying to call a little of attention to, because we don't think about that very much. Also, the way I wrote
it in stone, right, Bea?
Yeah, it's there, and it's hard to imagine that not happening, but things are changing. The other thing I've done is with language, in each one of these stories is I've used words that are the vernacular, the style of speaking. So the first one's very biblical. The second one is full of curse words, the Punch and Judy. I mean, it's very street talking kind of language. And this last one is very puritanical. So thy fault, Hester, her bold story. She comes out of prison with the child. So the young pilgrim mounts high stair, swaddling her lively little babe. Brilliant scarlet letter shames Hester. Boston boys taunt, males stare, widows point stiff fingers. Proper churchgoers judge her folly, wanton tart. Leaders deem young person hast fallen low, base character, fie. So these are all last names. It's amazing to have the last name Fie or Shames. You know, you wonder. There's wonderful stories there, I think.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for reading those.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
This book, Hawk Dove, is what they call a do-si-do, where there's a one story that goes one way and then you flip the book over and there's another on the other side. So if you keep moving, these were written just in veterans' headstones. And it's, so back to constraints, I only use vets' headstones to write this poem about war and peace. It's a fairly short poem, but I also was doing things with word play. This is a little piece from peace and a little piece from war, with scenery being reversed, the duality of it. So sowers plant plush green fields, farmer hoes more land, bales hay meadows. That's the peaceful side. The opposite side is a cannonball tatters meadows, cleaves white oak, wheat withers. Okay, next. And the yellow I just put there for emphasis. It's not in the book. But I also tried to play with imagery and the same word used twice, but differently, depending on whether it was peaceful or warlike. So we got Fairchild bounds over rocker, pillow battle going strong. That's peace. And then pillows appear in the war part. Nurse pillows lame man's head. And then there's one last example. Little people's cheeks blush, hearts rush. That's positive. And then in the war, nurse pillows lame man's head, cheeks blanch. So you got cheeks blushing and cheeks blanching, which I really like. Those opposite words too, of what can happen in the face.
Yeah.
Okay, one more, I think. Well, here's two more books, Dante Enters Hell and World's Warning headlines. Dante Enters Hell is, I joke about it being the plot summary of the Inferno. But headlines, I'll read you just that and then we'll be done. Headlines, World's Warning, if you go to the next image, is my summary of the first several months of the epidemic. And so I'm just going to read you the month of April because it's rather hopeful. And that was a year ago, April, that I wrote this. April brings Corona, 2 million world members, worst weekly job loss. In all-cap tweet, Trump stokes right-wing tribe to battle stay-in-place laws. Red cappers swarm in town center. Venter, heckler, point fingers, bump knuckles, leveling high fives. During news brief, president favors bleach sips, hopes to treat virus with sunshine. News anchors wince. Blase remarks stuns learned doctor, marks new low. Young flood Florida beach, surf, grill wieners, share drinks with pals. Rash Parsons offer Sunday sermons, churchgoers link arms. Sick singer lofts spittle showers over pew. Moist sprinkle harms prim widows. Elder pines to take deep nap. Constant strain mars her shallow sleep. Single mamas do double duty, fitting and reading to child with screen times. Strange leisure times see neighbors converse, missing normal laughter. Lively child teeters on new rollerblades. Proud parent smiles, mulling over good enough days. Okay, we can end it there.
Yeah.
But good enough days, that's what we got to do.
Focus on good enough days. Yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I met a lot of neighbors during this, which has been a positive outcome of the whole confinement.
Right. Thank you, Bea. Thanks.
You're
for
very welcome.
poems, and thank you for all that. That's the end of our formal program, and we're ready to take some questions if there's still time.
Thank you so much, both of you, Mary and Bea. I hope you have time to read the chat because it's mostly about how wonderful you are. Bea, how wonderful you are as a teacher, a mentor, a friend, and encouragement to go see the show, which, yes, we are so lucky in this town to have Credit Art Museum host your retrospective, which I was able to visit in the fall. I got in just before the museum had to close. And I was one of the people tempted to lift that red skirt, even though there was a sign saying, do not touch. I'm just going to pose one question quickly, and then I'm going to ask one of my own, since I have a microphone. But one of the questions that just came in following your beautiful gravestone readings, Bea, how many cemeteries did you have to visit to find all those names?
I've lost count, but I have about 7,000 names. Actually, I see Peter up there in the corner. He took me to one time. Sometimes people contribute stones that they photograph as well, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of squats. Everyone is a deep knee bend, so it keeps me moving.
Well, they're beautiful because not only is it because of the names themselves that fit nicely into these texts that you construct, but the fonts, you realize how many different fonts there are and different stone and different aging. I was struck, this is my question. I'm waiting for other people to jump in with theirs. The chat, interestingly enough, began with comments about Zoom glitches. And that reminded me of how technology both enables us and hinders us. And so, Bea, I'm wondering if there are parallels here to your work. The way the history of photography is sort of traditionally or classically taught, the discussion inevitably starts with photography as sort of modern technology and how these technologies evolve over time in tandem with scientific and industrial discoveries. You are so brilliantly fluent in so many different photographic techniques. And here I'm sort of relying on the wall labels of the exhibit. So many of these techniques, I suspect you learned out of contingency, not so much by choice. And did you find that frustrating, challenging, liberating? How did this all
of that? I mean, I mentioned really early on how hard it was if you wanted to work in color and multi images. So that was the process called quick print. And I came to that out of frustration with what was called cyanotype, which was just blue. And some of them I would paint and color it a little bit. You could sure tell that it was a cyanotype because it was always blue, or Van Dyke Brown was always brown. So when I found quick print, I could do any color I wanted. That was great. And then for various reasons, I could no longer work with quick print. And now you can't buy it. You can't find it anywhere. So that's been sort of the story of my career, as you start to master a process. And then in some cases, there's various reasons. It's not healthy, it's too expensive, it's obsolete, or whatever. And then you have to find something else. So I've always tried to adapt. And then I'm always on the lookout for something new too that intrigues me. And I don't always know that I'm gonna change my direction. Sometimes I feel I need to, but sometimes something will happen and it sparks this whole new idea. Like the gravestone thing happened when I was down teaching a workshop in North Carolina, and I was on Salem College's campus. They have a cemetery, and I saw a stone. First I saw a stone that said Tut, and that struck me as very funny. But then I saw one that said Southern, and I thought, how appropriate. Of course you'd be Southern. That'd be a good name. And so I photographed that. But I put that picture away for months before it occurred to me that I could possibly write with these words. There's a really good walkthrough tour that I did with David Hayes that's on the Cranner's website. And it's mainly, you have to just listen to us talk, but you'll see a proof sheet that I did in the Mount Hope Cemetery when I was a grad student. The one time I walked over there and photographed, and we retraced my steps 50 years later. And it's a very interesting presentation, I think.
Yeah. There is a good question in the chat. I don't know if you saw it, Masumi, but do you mind if I go ahead and read it?
Sure, please.
Sure. It says, I'm curious if Bea could expand on whether her work was received differently in the photo world versus the artist book world. And I'm curious to know more about how she sustained her practice and career in a photo world that was so male dominated and not necessarily accepting of her work at the time.
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there, but one thing is just keep working, just keep doing it and have the work to show for it, to be prepared. I mean, a lot of my opportunities to exhibit and so forth have happened because I have interesting work and I have a lot of it, and I've been doing it all along and not gotten discouraged. I think that's very, very important. In terms of being accepted in the artist book world, I'm still probably fairly marginal in that, but I came to, it's not that I came to it late, because I've been doing books since the 70s, but I haven't done what is, there's a tremendous amount of work in the artist book field in letterpress printing, and I never really I would have if I'd had access to one, but I never had access to a letterpress. So I specialize in offset printing because that's what I had, what I knew how to do. So my books are still, a lot of them rather hybrid, and and not necessarily what the luxury objects that people tend to think of as artist books, but I define them very loosely, as people who've taken my class can attest to.
Bea, can you just name off some of the collections that your books are in?
Sure, right here on campus, the University of Illinois Rare Book and Manuscript Library, Yale, the Beinecke Library. There's a very big one at Duke. Let me think who else. Oh, University of Washington. Mostly it's university rare book and manuscript libraries that have the fancier ones. The offset books are in libraries across the world, you know, the things like Flamingo in the Dark and Breaking the Rules. And well, that's not really an artist book, that's a textbook, but Flamingo in the Dark, Life's Lessons, Complexities, those sorts of books are in private collections as well.
And are some of those books available on your website and your store?
Oh yeah, thanks for the plug. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, there's still too many of them. That's what I was trying to warn people. It's one thing to make them, it's another to sell them and to distribute them and actually get them out there. You think you make it and then it'll just fly out the door. Well, that doesn't happen. And that's a big shock to people that have put a lot of effort into something. And more, there's so much more out there. It's so much easier to make a book with print on demand, that sort of thing, than it ever used to be. Therefore, the market is flooded with objects, which, you know, it's a double-edged sword. It's great because it means more people can do things and express things. On the other hand, it's harder, I think, to get noticed. It works both ways. I mean, the internet's amazing. The web, blogs, all of that. I remember when my son wrote music for a while and he would post a song and he'd have 2,000 hits or something, you know. I was like, do you know how long it took me to get 2,000 people to pay any attention to anything I did? And you have 2,000 in one day. And it doesn't seem like a big deal.
Bea, there's a question. I think we'll
Okay.
take one or two more questions and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay.
This just came in. Was your art ever aggressively challenged anywhere you tried to show?
Oh, sure. Of course. You know, bad reviews, very snide remarks about the only stitched canopy in the world, and some pretty bad stuff would be said. And it's like the little bad devil and the little good devil on your shoulder, but the little bad one that keeps saying those things is pretty hard to knock them flat and not listen to it. But it's humiliating when, you know, the New York Times or something like that, you've worked so hard, you think you've really done something, and then someone comes along and says something that, you know, perhaps in retrospect there was truth to it, but it didn't seem like it at the time. Yeah, you just can't listen to it too seriously and keep working. But there's a lot of good stuff too, you know.
Sure. Well, read the chat because it's all love.
Oh, well, it would be, I hope.
Another question, do you make it a point to finish a project that you start? What do you do if you get better ideas as you're doing something? Do you put it on the back burner?
I'm pretty good about finishing things. I am. Yeah, I sort of finish what I start. Occasionally, you know, you realize, oh, this is dead loss. You can stop. Or occasionally a body of work just naturally winds down. And the trick is to know when that is. Like the body of work, there's some of them in the show. The last photographs I ever did were called, it was a body of work called Return Trips. And I made about 100 of those over possibly 9 years or something. And as it became harder and harder, and also film wasn't happening anymore, it just sort of naturally died off. And that's when, luckily for me, the gravestone thing emerged. And that's, I've got a lot of them. I'm not sure there's another project at this point. The COVID thing was the one I just finished this fall. And I haven't been out, there's only so many graveyards within a driving distance of the house. So I haven't found a lot of new words, but I can't stop doing that yet.
Well, don't stop.
I'll know when it's time. My husband hopes it's soon.
Well, speaking of stopping and wrapping up, this would be a good moment to do that. I just had a couple of final comments. First of all, the chat will remain open for an additional 5 or so minutes if people want to
Okay.
chat among yourselves. Bea and Mary, I hope you can stay around for that. Just a little bit of freewheeling chats. The next Artist Alley event, which we're super excited to announce, is coming up in September of 21. And we're going to be hosting Jess Dugan and Vanessa Fabre's exhibit, which already Mary mentioned, or Paula mentioned it in introducing Mary, To Survive on the Shore, Photographs and Interviews with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Older Adults. Jess and Vanessa, and hopefully Mary, will be talking about this exhibit in person, we hope, otherwise by Zoom, so stay tuned for that. And finally, a little bit of passing the hat. Events like this afternoon's and upcoming fall event rely on donations from our supporters, and so you're kindly invited to contribute. Just visit the McKinley website, and I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. So thanks, everybody. On behalf of the McKinley Foundation Artist Alley Committee, please feel free to stick around. You won't be, the one problem with Zoom is that, of course, when you leave a meeting, it's sort of, then you realize that you're back in your little house, in your little study, and all very lonely. And now we've got this beautiful community of Bea fan club and Mary fan club. So please enjoy. Thank you very much.